Hey y'all, it's me Sydney and welcome back to Planet Sid. Today we are going to be discussing different ways how women are portrayed in the media and the myth of the perfect victim, along with performative feminism. So if you guys are interested in that, then stay tuned. So within the past few years, we've seen sort of a mass reassessment of the way women have been treated in the media in the past. You can see this with people like Britney Spears and Monica Lewinsky, for example. And this can be seen when powerful men are actually being held accountable with the documentaries and the overall change of tone whenever we revisit certain scandals. But why weren't these women taken seriously the first time? So if you identify as a woman, then you probably have been called crazy at least once in your life, or have you seen it happen to another woman before? And this may have happened whenever you were arguing with a significant other, watching a presidential debate, or by reading a headline where a scandal is happening when a man is accused of a heinous act. So more often than not, when a woman accuses a man of a heinous act, or if a woman is just involved in a certain scandal and a man is involved as well, they can sometimes be painted out to be a scorned woman, or even worse, hysterical. And when this happens, the effects are much more damaging and long-lasting to women opposed to the men who are being accused of such heinous acts. Because in my opinion, it seems that the world is always very eager to shame and discredit women. I do want to make a quick disclaimer before we get in too deep that men, of course, can be accused of false crimes, and that men as well can be victims of assault and domestic violence and other crimes as well. So I don't want to disregard that, but in this specific video, I'm focusing on women. So with that out of the way, a lot of times women are labeled as scorned or hysterical to avoid holding men accountable, and this can be seen in headlines or if a lawyer is trying to build a case, for example. And it doesn't help that we as a society have been socialized to believe more that a woman is crazy opposed to a man being harmful. And this narrative has been around for centuries, tracing all the way back to 1900 BC in Egypt and ancient Greece. And interestingly enough, the word hysterical originates from the Greek word hysteria, which means uterus. So for a very long time, hysterical was actually a medical diagnosis, and basically women were being told that they're basically irrational and they're emotional beings, so that they can't be trusted. Now, I do want to note that the medical diagnosis of hysteria applies to all genders, but it disproportionately affects women, especially in the past, because hysteria was actually an official diagnosis in the DSM until the 1980s. And symptoms of hysteria could just be women who were perceived as unruly, if they were menopausal, if they had trouble bearing children, or even if they suffered from a miscarriage. Later on, the infamous psychologist Sigmund Freud would go on to theorize that hysteria was caused by sexual repression or abuse. So if you weren't a perfect woman, then you ran the risk of being called hysterical. And the overall idea of hysteria has gone on to deeply affect the medical field in women's health, and it only gets worse if you have more intersecting identities. But in my opinion, over the years, the hysterical woman has evolved into the scorned woman, and it is echoed in many conversations surrounding women in general. And I would describe both hysterical and a scorned woman as gendered insults that reinforce feminine stereotypes. And Urban Dictionary would go on to define a woman scorned as, quote, a woman so furious that nothing will satisfy them but the destruction of the object or person they loathe, unquote. And these narratives have been assigned to women for such a long time, but with the advent of the internet, it has only gotten much worse. Now, in the last 30 years, we've seen these gendered insults thrown around at women in high-profile scandals, and these insults strip them of their dignity. A situation that's been getting a lot of attention within these past few weeks would be the Mike Tyson and Robin Givens scandal, which I honestly wasn't even aware of because it happened before I was born, so I didn't even know that they were married. But Mike Tyson and Robin Givens, they had a very brief but tumultuous relationship. I believe that they were married for about 8 months, but their marriage and the treatment of Robin Givens is being brought back up again because there was recently a Hulu miniseries about Mike Tyson, and also there is a biopic that is currently being made as well, and Robin Givens said that she wants no part of it and that she doesn't want to be featured in it at all. But just to give you a quick rundown of the situation if you don't know, Robin Givens is an American actress and model who married Mike Tyson, a world-class heavyweight boxing champion, in 1988. And of course, their marriage lasted for about 8 months, but towards the end of their marriage, things got really bad. And throughout the divorce, Robin alleged that Mike Tyson had been very physically abusive and emotionally abusive towards her throughout their marriage. And this can be seen in their infamous 2020 interview with Barbara Walters, where Robin literally says that he is pretty violent, and Mike just sits there and he eventually does go on to deny these accusations. But later on, Robin would allege that Mike threatened to kill her, and Mike even went on to write that Robin can take a good punch, and he even went so far as making a joke saying that they both sock each other on the Oprah Winfrey Show. But as the divorce was going on, when Robin was alleging that Mike was very abusive towards her, he would go on to counter that and say that she was a gold digger and was just after his money. And when I tell you, the headlines and the late night talk show hosts took that and ran with it, they did. Robin was soon dubbed a ruthless gold digger, and she was even called the most hated woman in America, because this is Mike Tyson that we're talking about, and in that time period specifically, Mike Tyson, Michael Jordan, and Michael Jackson were like the most important people on this earth. But meanwhile, Robin is being regarded as the most hated woman in America, whereas Mike didn't really face any real repercussions. I do know that after they ended up divorcing, she did get a $10 million settlement, but as far as like his career or anything, he was just fine. And public opinion was really on his side, and everybody was convinced that she was just this terrible person, and that he was this big giant marshmallow of a person, and that he could never hurt somebody even though he is a boxer. And I'm not saying that if you're a boxer then you're violent or whatever, like it's your job, but people were so convinced that that just wasn't even a possibility, regardless of the fact that he alluded to it on national television on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And this whole case sounds very familiar to another case that just ended, which I don't even want to get too far deep into. And I actually found an article about the Robin Givens and Mike Tyson scandal that was written in 1988 as it was unfolding, and I was in disbelief, but not really, considering the social climate that we're in when it comes to powerful men being accused of domestic violence, but it was shocking to say the least. So let's take a look. So this article was with the Sun Sentinel, and it's titled "The Woman America Loves to Hate, the soon-to-be ex Mrs. Tyson has asked for no sympathy and none will be given." And I'm just going to read the article. It says, Robin Givens has accomplished the impossible. She's made Donna Rice look downright innocent. In spite of giving up any claims on Mike Tyson's money, the soon-to-be ex-Mrs. World Heavyweight Champion is the unequivocal holder of the Most Hated Woman in America title. And then it says, how much do we hate her? A lot. CNN Newsnight has taken 2 polls that reflect Givens' popularity. On October 7th, they asked who's at fault in the marriage breakup, Mike Tyson or Robin Givens. 93% of the callers said it was big bad Robin. Only 7% of it said it was poor old Mike. On October 10th, they asked should Mike Tyson be granted an annulment in his marriage to Robin Givens. 92% said yes and 8% said no. And in the article it says, on October 7th, USA Today, the television show asked should Robin Givens get any of Mike Tyson's money. 4% said that she should, and 96% said that she shouldn't. And then they go on to say that free Mike Tyson t-shirts have been spotted. And then in this article, I guess somebody wrote in like a letter to the editor, but it says, Dear Abby, Abigail Van Buren deals with domestic difficulties all the time. Here's how she sizes up the Tyson Givens debacle. It says, quote, I see this big, strong, muscular guy who's really a marshmallow inside. It seems like he's the one who's been abused. I'd say he's been had, and that's why he's getting all the sympathy. For all his world championships, I think he was naive. And then they go on to ask any chance that the marriage can be saved. And Abigail replies, quote, I don't think so. I think he was most sincere when he said there was no chance of them getting back together, unquote. And then they ask Abby basically what advice she would give to Mike Tyson. And she says, quote, I tell him keep your dukes up and don't be so quick to hit the canvas next time. And they also asked her what advice she would give to Robin Givens. And she said, quote, I tell her, first of all, keep your head up. Second, learn from your mistakes. If you admit you've been wrong, you'll be forgiven much more quickly. But if you deny it and try to defend yourself, you won't be, unquote. And then they go on to talk about the 2020 interview with Barbara Walters. And then they ask, why won't you be reading the Robin Givens story part 2? And it says because Kitty Kelly won't write it. Kelly is the biographer of the stars Jackie O, Nancy Reagan, but she says she won't write this one. And they ask why not? She says that she's not interested. Kelly will go on to say, quote, William Faulkner once said, to make writing worthwhile, you must write from the heart, not the glands. This story seems so glandular, very pathetic. My heart goes out to poor Mike Tyson. unquote. And then in this same article in 1988, they go on to like ask what if they can't settle their divorce outside of court and they have to go on to trial. And so it says that if Tyson and Givens can't settle their differences out of court, the case will have to be decided by a judge. If that happens, divorce attorney Bernie Ranella, who has represented various sides in the Walgreens and Riley divorces, given his truthers, will rather walk Mr. Tyson into the courthouse than Mrs. Tyson for one simple reason. Quote, public opinion has an impact on judges even though they're supposed to be impartial. Mike Tyson has one of the most prestigious titles in the world, and the way she talked about him in that interview with Barbara Walters turned my stomach. It was the most incredible put down I've seen put downs every day. And the way he had to put up with that mother, Mrs. Ruth Roper, that's another reason why people will side with him. These people just manipulated a poor, ignorant guy. They obviously used him for money. Here she is, a beautiful college graduate. The guy is less than intelligent and less than attractive. You know what she was out for, unquote. So yeah, basically they're like talking to different people from like different book publishers to different divorce attorneys to see if they will be on the side of Robin, and none of them are. But the language that they're using to describe Robin opposed to the language that they're using to describe Mike is very different. And then at the end of this article it says, but wait, let's not end on such a negative note. Givens is a beautiful young woman and at least one person would like to hire her talents. Robin, call Gary Cole, Playboy's photo editor. He's got you on the top of his list. Quote, she went way up in value when she and Mike Tyson first became an item. Now she's in a category all by herself, says Cole. Playboy's interest won't surprise Givens since she and her mother talked to Playboy earlier about the possibility of doing a photo spread. And if Givens needs some bucks now that she says she doesn't want any money from Tyson, Playboy is talking 6 figures plus a bonus. And then at the very end it says, every cloud has a silver lining. You know that interview with Walters where Given cried real tears? It'll make a heck of an audition tape. So I don't even know where to start with that. And of course public opinion wasn't on her side, and the editors and the people that they interviewed weren't on her side as well. But the language that they were using to describe her and the language that they were using to describe Mike Tyson are so day and night, along with the fact that they tried to put in Playboy, because I believe that she did actually do a Playboy spread, and they didn't outright slut shame her, but they kind of did. And then they made fun of the interview that she did with Barbara Walters and said that she's never cried real tears and it'll make of a heck of an audition tape. And I'm not really surprised by this specific article or anything, but it sounded very reminiscent of a lot of the articles that I'm seeing today as far as the last huge trial that ended a few weeks ago and how they described the woman as well. Whether you believe Amber Heard or not, it's up to you. Like, it doesn't really matter what we believe, but the way that they describe her and the memes and the jokes that happen are so disproportionate in comparison to Johnny, and just the language that they use about her is so damaging, because if you call a woman crazy, if you call her a slut, if you call her a liar or a gold digger, that stuff has serious repercussions on how you're perceived, and then that can affect the entire course of your life. So I don't know, I just thought that that specific article was so interesting. Not really much has changed. Like, of course they don't talk about her like that to this day, but it's just they moved on to somebody else, and I just thought that that was so gross. But anyways, we'll dive in deeper into the language that's being used in this article and just in general later in the video. But what I found so troubling about this entire situation was that Mike alluded to being physically abusive to Robin Givens on more than one occasion, and people just blew over it and still minimized that situation to Robin being after his money. And interestingly enough, after their divorce settlement where Robin was given $10 million, Mike was convicted of allegedly raping an 18-year-old girl, and Mike was 25, but he does deny this to this day. And his defense and the media painted this 18-year-old girl as another money-hungry, crazy lady who was upset because she wanted more than a one-night stand with Mike Tyson. But Mike Tyson was convicted, so he served 3 years out of a 6-year sentence. And even more interestingly, I don't think people know this because I didn't know this. I came across this as I was doing research, but even more interestingly, in 1992, Erin Crosby would go on to allege that she was also sexually assaulted by Mike Tyson at a party. And if you think that name sounds familiar, it's because that is Bill Cosby's daughter, which is so, I mean, Bill, I don't even have words for Bill Cosby. That situation was really disheartening, and the thing that I found most sad about it was Bill's cool reaction to it, which I'm not surprised by now, because of course we know what happened with Bill Cosby as far as Me Too, even though he's not even in jail anymore. And this story only came out because Erin's ex-boyfriend had threatened to leak the story to news outlets for money, so she had ended up just coming out with it 3 years later. And before the allegations became public, Erin told her father, Bill Cosby, and he had a very cool stance. And in the article with the Washington Post, they were going to say that, quote, when his own daughter, then 23, was the one making the accusations, he took a decidedly less confrontational approach, and in the process gave a hint of his attitude towards sexual misdeeds and their consequences. No criminal charges were sought against Tyson, who would later be convicted of raping another woman. Instead, Bill Cosby insisted through his attorneys that Mike seek counseling. It was an approach that would strain an already troubled relationship with his daughter, according to her former attorney, who said, quote, he played more of a conciliatory role, which she thought he would handle it more like a father-daughter opposed to a politician or a celebrity, unquote, said Louis J. Terminello, who was her previous attorney. So basically, Bill advised Mike Tyson to go to counseling in lieu of pressing charges, and he also advised for his daughter to go to rehab as well because she was struggling with a drug addiction. But Erin does dispute this and says that it was her own personal choice to go to rehab, so take that as you will. And all of this was happening before the public was aware of this, and the alleged incident between Erin Cosby and Mike Tyson had also happened around the same time, where Bill Cosby's alleged victims were saying that they were also sexually assaulted by him back in the 80s and 90s as well. So that probably informed his cool demeanor as well, because he was just as guilty. But then later on, Bill would even go so far as to do an interview with the LA Times, and he basically assassinated his daughter's character, which only gave the media and Mike Tyson supporters more ammo. And I want to make it clear that Erin was just released from rehab whenever this interview had took place, and Bill made it very clear that he was not upset with her about her drug abuse problem and that she was clean, but he was more so upset with her behavior. So in this interview with the LA Times, Bill will go on to say that, quote, this particular daughter seems to be the only one who is really very selfish. It isn't that we hang our heads or that we're embarrassed by this, because we've been living in this person who knows that her problem isn't cocaine or alcohol. I think that she's a child who has refused to take responsibility for supporting herself. She never finishes anything. She uses her boyfriends. She wants to find her things, but she can't stand anybody else's dirt, which is important. Developmentally, she's still around 11 years old. The problem isn't alcohol or drugs. At the rehab center, her urine showed up negative. It's behavioral. She's very stubborn. It's painful, not to me and Camille, but to her. It's going to take her hitting rock bottom where she is totally exhausted, and at that point where she can't fight anymore. Right now, we're estranged. She can't come here. She is not a person you can trust. You think you're not a good parent because you don't answer the call, but you can't just let the kid use you, unquote. And I don't want to do too much, because I understand how strained relationships can come, especially if somebody is an addict or whatever, but I just find it very peculiar that he chose to do an interview about this, especially when she was just leaving rehab, and especially after she alleged that she was sexually assaulted, and he decided to do an interview in general. I just think that's strange. It did more harm than good, because if your father is saying that you're basically a terrible person and the media doesn't know you outside of being his daughter, and at that point in time, this is back in the 80s and early 90s where he was still America's dad. I just find it very interesting and sad that his daughter said that she was sexually assaulted by one of the most powerful men in the world, and his next step was to remain neutral and tell him to get counseling, and then assassinate her character after that in an interview. And later on, because this particular scandal was gaining a lot of traction, Erin did do a few television appearances, and most notably she came on the Donahue show. And there was a segment where the audience would ask questions about her story, because she was like telling the story of when she was allegedly assaulted by Mike Tyson. When the audience got to ask her the questions, the overall tone of the questions being asked were somewhat doubtful. Like, of course, some people did like really like try and empathize with her, and they seemed to like really be at least listening, but it seemed to always been like a question as like why they didn't believe her. So they asked her things like if she was drunk, or if she was attracted to Mike Tyson, or if she just wanted to accuse him for the publicity of it, as if her father isn't the most famous person in America. And throughout this entire interview that she was doing with Phil Donahue, he repeatedly referred to Mike Tyson as the champ. Her feelings and her experience weren't being taken into account at all. And this language that was used to describe and discredit victims is echoed time and time again. Because fast forward a few more years, we get the Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky scandal, where Bill Clinton, the 42nd president of the United States, entered into a sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky, who was a 22-year-old White House intern. He's literally twice her age. End of conversation right there. And of course, since he was a president of the United States, when that story came out, it was a worldwide spectacle, and it spawned many pop culture moments that are still echoed today. But what I found interesting about this scandal was that there was an impeachment trial which concluded in his acquittal. So all in all, Bill left this situation really embarrassed but unscathed. Whereas Monica, the general public and the press and the headlines and the media, like everybody, they had a field day on her as if she wasn't a 22-year-old girl. And this resulted in the media slut-shaming her and making fun of her appearance, and also calling her like a predator, which is ironic because he was twice her age and he was a president of the United States and she is an intern fresh out of college. So basically they were trying to say that she was preying on him, and they really put out and hammered in this narrative of Monica being this young promiscuous girl just looking for a come up. And there was such a stark contrast in how the media portrayed Bill opposed to Monica, because the only thing that was called into question for Bill was his professionalism, whereas nothing was off limits with Monica Lewinsky. And even interestingly enough, when he was on trial for his impeachment, he was only on trial for perjury and obstruction of justice, not sexual harassment. Whereas Monica for the next 20 years was solely defined by a sexual encounter, which I guess was consensual, but you know, power dynamics and all of that stuff gets mixed in. Like, Leo, get out the frame. And I don't even want to get into the entire Madonna whore complex of this situation, because people were making it seem like since Hillary was, you know, the first lady and she was this amazing wife and everything, then that automatically made Monica a whore. And it's just like, the only person who was wrong was Bill. And it was either you were a Hillary and you were respectable, or you were a Monica and you weren't. And what was so disheartening about these situations is that there wasn't anything really learned, because the same rhetoric is repeated today. So there was actually nothing really learned from the media and the public shaming and harassing women who actually need to be protected, while turning a blind eye to the men who are clearly in the wrong. And this is replicated many times. You can see this in the public treatment and harassment of Britney Spears and her mental health struggles due to her conservatorship, the Woody Allen and Mia Farrow scandal, where she alleged that he sexually assaulted their daughter Dylan, and in turn she was called a gold digger and a scorned woman, even though Woody Allen would go on to marry his stepdaughter Soon-Yi. But still, in this situation, Mia Farrow was the crazy scorned woman. And this can even be seen today with the Megan Thee Stallion and Tory Lanez case, which it was literally 4 people in a car and Megan was the only one who walked away with bullet wounds, and people are still confused about that. And so are some of these media blogs, more specifically the black media blogs, and even with the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial. Because I don't really care who you think is guilty, the way that these women are being treated in the media and online is just dead ass wrong, because it is such a deep level of public shaming and harassment that these women face just because another man said that they're a liar or that they're crazy. And that's just about all it takes for them to be discredited and to justify harassing them, because a man can throw these gendered insults around, and that is just about all it takes for a woman's credibility to be called into question. And there seems to be a lot of shame reserved specifically for women that follows them for the rest of their lives, whereas men might face some career setbacks, and that is only on a rare occasion. Which leads me into the false idea of the perfect victim. The perfect victim doesn't exist, because all of the women that I have mentioned are all different but are assigned the same narratives. Robin Givens graduated from school at 15 and went on to an Ivy League school. So even if she didn't find success in acting and modeling, she very well was capable of building a nice life for herself. So I don't think she needed Mike Tyson, because marriage wasn't her only option for leading an abundant life. And Erin Cosby didn't need any more publicity, because her father was literally the most famous man in America, and he was on TV every day once a week. And Monica Lewinsky was called a whore and was the butt of the joke for years, and was even put on suicide watch, whereas Bill Clinton's approval rating went up due to a situation where consent is just a slippery slope with those kind of power dynamics. And he was also twice her age, and to me, that's not a relationship. And Britney Spears was mocked and harassed by tabloids and fans when she was obviously suffering from a mental health crisis due to her literally not having autonomy over her own body and her life. And Mia Farrow was called a bitter, scorned, crazy woman because she accused her ex-husband of allegedly sexually assaulting their child. Amber Heard alleged that her ex-husband Johnny Depp was physically abusive and became the target of a successful smear campaign. And I'm only bringing this up because these are all very different situations, but they are all being treated relatively the same to different degrees. And it doesn't matter what you or I believe as far as if they're innocent or guilty, it doesn't really matter. But they were never even given a fair chance in the court of public opinion due to things like gendered insults and the myth of the perfect victim. Because all it takes for a woman's credibility to be called into question is a man who objects. Because these women weren't considered to be perfect, they weren't believed, and not being believed as a woman has very real repercussions. And this isn't just reserved for rich, white, wealthy men. Sexism and misogyny, of course, run very deep in all aspects of society, more specifically in our criminal justice and court systems. So that also bleeds into the jury, the judges, the prosecutors, the officers, everybody. And I actually saw that the nonprofit organization, the ACLU, found in a study on why domestic violence survivors don't report that nearly 90% of survey responders said that contact with the police sometimes or often resulted in involvement of CPS in threatening survivors with the loss of custody of their children due to the bias of the justice system based on gender, race, poverty, etc. Because it isn't a far stretch whenever a woman accuses a man of domestic violence or even sexual assault to a minor, and he could try and get custody of their child, and sometimes he does, and that ends up hurting the children as well. So now I want to get into the cycle and the redemption arcs that we keep on getting sucked into, because it is happening right in front of our eyes, and I just want people to be more aware. It's a never-ending cycle of a woman accusing a powerful man of something heinous, and the man denies the accusations, and she gets berated and harassed in the news outlets, and then 20 years pass, and then there's a documentary or a biopic, and then everybody's like, how do we let this happen? And then it just starts again with another victim, and then we swear that we'll do better next time, but of course next time never comes. It's not funny, because literally with that old newspaper that we had read on the Mike Tyson and Robin Givens situation, the exact same rhetoric is still being used today to describe potential victims, along with the blatant disrespect of survivors on social media. So now let's revisit Mike Tyson's 1992 rape conviction. So I wanted to do a little comparison of older scandals and how they are revisited today. And sometimes the tone changes, whereas other times they still haven't completed the cycle of the redemption arc. So the same rhetoric is still repeated 20, 30 something years later. So in a radio interview with Howard Stern in 1992, where Donald Trump is asked about the conviction, Donald Trump would go on to call the conviction a travesty and say that the survivor, quote, wanted it real bad, and suggested that he shouldn't have to go to jail and that he should be allowed to pay her off. These remarks aren't really surprising considering who's making them. Like, we all know all the wild things that Donald Trump has said, and of course this was back in 1992 whenever he was first convicted. But the fact that such harmful rhetoric was even allowed on air at any point in time is just honestly really sad. But this was in 1992, so you would think that we have progressed as a society, right? No, we haven't. Because last month on May 10th, 2022, Mike Tyson was on Bill Mayer's podcast called Club Randoms with Bill Mayer. And around the 37-minute mark, Bill Mayer says that he never thought that Mike committed that crime. And he's referring to the rape conviction of Mike Tyson allegedly raping the 18-year-old girl. Bill Mayer even went on to further elaborate, and he said, quote, "I don't think that was rape. I think what Mike did was have sex with someone consensually and then wasn't nice to her after. Then someone gets angry. Maybe you're guilty of that," unquote. And Mike will go on to say that he is grateful for the situation because he was previously disrespectful to women but got away with it. But he alluded to this bad boy reputation being the reason why he was convicted and not the actual alleged crime, even though he was the most famous and beloved person in the world. The tone of the interview with Donald Trump in 1992 and the tone of the interview that Mike Tyson is doing with Bill Mayer today in 2022 literally 30 years later, it's literally no different. And so even 30 years later, the language and the tone that they use hasn't really changed, even though we think it would, since we have progressed as a society. And furthermore, Woody Allen was accused by his ex-wife Mia Farrow of sexually assaulting his toddler daughter in 1992. And he even married his stepdaughter 5 years later in 1997 and went on to make 27 more movies and was awarded the Golden Globe Cecil B. DeMille Award in 2014. When this whole celebration of him being this Lifetime Achievement Golden Globe winner, the accusations resurfaced, and then a few years later is when Me Too happened. But Woody Allen is still regarded as one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, and he still has the support of many people in Hollywood. Of course, within these past few years, people have been distancing themselves from him, but not everybody. Like, he still has some pretty big names endorsing him still. And these accusations of him allegedly sexually assaulting his own child came out 30 years ago, and it wasn't buried. Like, it was a pretty big thing. And so it's so easy to see that Hollywood still tolerates harmful narratives and potential predators until it's no longer profitable. Because I personally don't believe that had not so many victims come forward for Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, and Bill Cosby, I believe that they still would be working to this day. For these three specific people, they reached a point to where their talents could no longer trump the negative press that was associated with them, so they were no longer profitable to Hollywood. So when they do figure out that they can no longer capitalize off of these alleged abusers, they turn to the survivors, because performative feminism is a very real thing, and public outrage sells, especially if it's a documentary or a biopic, and Hollywood knows this. So now we're going to get into performative feminism, and I don't want to be too critical, but I do feel like feminism hasn't really evolved much these past few decades, because we're still discussing sex workers' worth. But it appears that we have progressed as a society due to movements like Time's Up and Me Too, which are still great movements, and they have supported many survivors and exposed many abusers as well. So I don't want to discredit those movements, but I feel that we as a society have overestimated how much progress we really have made. Because I feel like in the grand scheme of things, what we're seeing as far as feminism in Hollywood is just a display of performative feminism on behalf of big Hollywood executives, because in order for there to be an actual change, it would need to be systemic. And if that were to happen, it would be no more Hollywood. Now, I do understand that it's very easy for me to critique celebrities because I don't know them and we never met. But I do want to stress the importance of holding people accountable on a more intimate level. And this could look like you not wanting to associate with somebody who has done something heinous, or associate with an apologist, or just be more direct and call them out. Whatever approach keeps you the most safe, of course, because I do feel that it is important to do something if you see something, but I don't want to give off the impression that I think it's enough to point the finger at celebrities and Hollywood execs, because I understand that there's work that I can be doing on a smaller scale as far as things in my everyday life. So I just want to put that out there, because I genuinely do believe that if everyone put in a small effort to call people out on certain things and to not tolerate certain behaviors, like, then that could be like a paradigm shift for feminism, and that would shift the Overton window towards upholding and protecting women's rights. But the thing is, everybody would need to want that, which I don't think they do, because it is so mind-boggling that we have the awareness to know that R. Kelly and Weinstein are abusers and that Britney was a victim, but we still tolerate people like Woody Allen, Tory Lanez, and Johnny Depp, for example, and even the people who are behind spreading such damaging narratives for their alleged victims right before our eyes. Because why is Savannah Guthrie conducting interviews with Amber Heard, Johnny Depp's lawyers, and Amber Heard's lawyers as well, when she has a very clear conflict of interest? Her husband was a consultant on Johnny Depp's legal team, and you are not the only person who works at your network. You're not the only person who does interviews, so why are you the one conducting the interview when you have a very clear conflict of interest? And I didn't watch the full interview, because as soon as I found out that her husband, who is Michael Feldman, was a consultant on the case, I just knew that I wasn't going to waste my time watching that interview. But just in the clips that I saw, she seemed very biased in her line of questioning. That's just my personal opinion. But I personally don't think that any of this is by coincidence, because right now it is so profitable to not believe Amber. Now, I have a theory that because people love to see the downfall of women, they get some sort of schadenfreude I think that's how you say it. You can correct me in the comments. But they get some sort of schadenfreude from it. And these networks, these Hollywood execs and media outlets are aware of this as well. They know that harassing, disrespecting, and discrediting women will always sell until it won't. Because then they'll flip the script and perform feminism, because outrage always sells all the time, all the while doing the same thing to another woman. And then some huge Hollywood studio would produce a documentary or a biopic, and then these actors and actresses will collect their awards, and then the same thing just happens again to a different person. And I just want actual change and not the appearance of change, and for people to be more aware, because mark my words, in a few years there will be people diving into the Amber Heard Johnny Depp phenomenon of a case, and their tone will be very different. Whether or not, if you believe she was actually abused or not, the way that she was portrayed in the media was absolutely not fair, and it was not right. And in 10 years everybody's going to act like they don't know how this happened. Like it just always happens, and whoever the next person is, and the next person after that, and the next person after that. So that's all I have to say. This is a very heavy topic, and so my next few videos are going to be more lighthearted, but I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and again, my name is Sydney, and I hope you guys feel safe and seen wherever you are, and I hope you guys are finding joy and fulfillment on your journey of self-expression. Until next time.